In this video, we will learn how to use JSON Web Tokens or JWT with Node.js. So what is a JSON Web Token? JSON Web Tokens are also referred to as JWT. They are a compact and self-contained way for securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. So we're sending information as a JSON object, and they are a compact and self-contained way for doing that. And we'll come back and try and understand both these terms, compact and self-contained. The information that has been sent can be verified and trusted because it is digitally signed. So the information that is getting transmitted is signed, is digitally signed, and hence can be verified and trusted. Why are JWTs compact? Because of their size, their small size, they can be sent through a URL, a post parameter, or inside an HTTP header. They are self-contained. And what does that mean? That the payload, the information that was sent in the JWT, contains all the requisite information, the required information about the user. A JWT or a JSON Web Token consists of three parts: the header, the payload, and the signature, and these are separated by dots. So in the sample JWT, you can see there are three parts. This is part 1, the red one, then this is part 2, and this is the part 3, and they are separated by dots. And what are these three parts? The header, the payload, and the signature. So how do we use JWTs and how do they work? So suppose from a browser or a client, we send a post request with a username and password as a login. At the server, we would authenticate it. We would check whether the username and password are correct, and then create a JWT using a secret key. Once this has been created at the server, we send or return the JWT to the client. Now, whenever the client needs to request for some information, it sends the JWT in the authorization header. So this is the typical way we use JWT. We will store the JWT, the token, at the client, at the browser, and send the JWT in the authorization header. Whenever the server gets that request, it will check the JWT signature. It will check whether the information is valid, correct or not. And if it is valid, it will get the user information from the JWT and use that to process it and send the response back to the client. So this is the typical process of how JSON Web Tokens work. How do we use that in Node.js? So there is a module, a Node.js module for JWT, and we can install it using the standard command npm install JSON Web Token. Now that we have done that, let's look at a couple of exercises as to how to use it. So the first exercise is create a node server wherein we have a post/login. It gets the username and password in the body, and if they match, it sends a JWT token, otherwise an error. So this is the first part of this usage that we saw. In the post, we get a username and password. With that, we create a JWT using a secret key, and we return the JWT to the client. So this is what we are trying to implement here. So here in our VS Code, we have our standard boilerplate Express code, and the Express server is running on the port 2410. What do we want to do? We will get an app.post/login function request response. And what do we need to do here? We will get a username and password, and then based on the username and password, if it matches, we will issue a JSON Web Token. So first, let's use required for our const JWT is equal to require JSON web token. Once we have done that, let's define a const jwt underscore key. So this is the secret key we are using, and let's define it any string that we want to. So let me say secret key and put some digits here. So that's our key, and let's also define a JWT expiry time. So this is the time after which the token or the JWT will expire, and this is time in seconds. So we have said defined it as 300, which is say 5 minutes. Now in our app.post, what do we need to do? Suppose we have this data here where we have some users, ID, name, users, and we want to check whether the username and password match. So we will just get them. So let username comma password is equal to request.body. So we can get the username and the password. Let user is equal to, and we will now first need to require it. So let users is getting exported is equal to require data2.js. So we can just do users dot find u such that u dot, what are the field names, name and password. U dot name is equal to username and u dot password is equal to password. So we can do that validation here. If user, then we will create the JWT and send it. So how do we do that? If user, we will generate our token. So let's say const token is equal to JWT dot sign. And what all do we pass? We pass the payload. What do we want to send? We want to send this user object in a JSON. Next, what do we want to use it? Using our key. And the third part is a detail, the algorithm that we are using. So what is the algorithm that we are using? The algorithm here will be HS256, and we have the expires in, so which we set as JWT expiry time. So these are the parameters we need to give to generate our token in JWT. Once our token has been generated, we will just send the token. That's what we do here. Else what do we do? Response dot status 401 dot send login failed. So if it does not match, we just send this. So this is our code. This should work. Let's test it out. Let's go to our Postman. And what is the request we want to create? HTTP localhost :2410, and what was it? Login. It's a post request. And what's the body? Username. And what's the value of the username? Let's send, say, George. Is George. Password is George. Let's send this data. And what have we gotten as a response? If we look at the response, we have gotten the JWT token. So this is our token. This is the first part of it, as we saw. This is the second part of it, and this is the third part of it. So this has generated a token here. So That was our requirement, which is what we have done. Next, what do we want to do? Get/myOrders checks and validates the JWT in the header. If it is not present or invalid, sends an error. Otherwise, if we have validated the JWT, sends the orders for that user. So here in our data, we have the IDs for the users here and we have orders. So if we get the user from the JWT, we'll take out its ID and find the orders for that user and send them as a response. So how should we do it? Let's start writing our code. app.get/myOrders function request comma response. Now what is it that we need to do? First we will need to get the JWT from the header. So let's get it. Const token is equal to request.headers authorization. Let's print it on the console. Console.log token and token. Once we have done that, if we did not receive a token, if not token, if there was no token present, then we can just send a response.status 401.send please log in first. So you have not logged in, you should first log in. If that is not the case, if we got a token, else what do we need to do? We will need to verify the token. So how do we verify the token? We will jwt.verify, and what all do we pass to it? The token, the key that we had created, the JWT key, and it gives us a function. It calls a function error comma say data. If error, so if there was an error in verification, we can just console.log error, or we can just send that error to the as the response. So let's do that. If error response dot status 403 dot send error. Else what do we do? Else, now that we have gotten the token, we will need to find out the orders. So orders is exported as orders. Let's do that. So let's go and check. So this is the required. Let's get orders and let's filter it. So let orders1 is equal to orders dot filter order such that order dot user ID is equal to, what should it be? So once we have gotten the data here, we got the data. So let's just do two things. First, let's console.log data. Now this data had a JSON that we had put in. What was the name of that JSON? In the post we had put in a JSON user. So we can get data.user.id. So there is a JSON named user here, and within that user we had put in all those details. So we've gotten the orders. Let's do it. Response.send orders1. So this should work for us. Let's go ahead and test it. Let's start the server. So let's create a GET request. To my orders. And we did not put any authorization key. So in our headers, these were our headers. Can we see authorization? No, there was no key value authorization. So we get please log in first. which is fine. Now if we let's put in an authorization and let's give it some random value and let's send it. We again get please log in first. We should have gotten the other message, the error message. We did not get it. Let's check. So in both the cases, our token is undefined. So we have not received our token. To debug it, standard practice, let's just do request.headers. Let's log it onto the console. Let me send this request again. So these are the headers. We have gotten an authorization, but here token is undefined. Now, why is that the case? So notice here the authorization is with a small lowercase, whereas here it starts with a capital A. So that's the issue. What did we send? We sent an authorization with a capital A, but we got here in our headers as a small a. So this is what is a standard practice in headers here. So we should make it always with a lowercase. So this is a very common error. And if ever you get this issue, just do a console.log and match them and you will be able to fix it. Let's now test it again. Let's restart the server. And now when we send it, what do we get? We get an error. What is the error? JSONWebToken error, and the message is a JSON, the JWT was malformed. So that's perfect. Now let's send this token, the login token that we generated. Let me copy it and send it. So in the authorization, and we get another error, name token expired error. We had put in a time frame for that token. Maybe we have exceeded it. So we have gotten a token expired error. Let's regenerate the token. So now we have generated a new token. Let's see if this will work. Let's copy this token and put it here. And send it. And now we have gotten our orders. So this is now working fine. Let's look at our console. So we got the token. From the token, we got the user. So this is what our data is. So within that data, we had put in this object. That was our information that we sent. User is this JSON. So that is why data.user.id, and we got all the details. Let's log in with somebody else, somebody who has more orders. So let's say or user ID 2 is Sarah. Let's log in with that. So here let me change it to Sarah and Sarah. So I get the token generated. Let me send this token in the and what do I get? I get user ID 2 and all the values, all the orders associated with this user. Similarly here on the console, we get that ID is 2, name is Sarah and password is this. So notice here in this case, in the get my orders, we did not send any /2 or any route parameter or any query parameter or a query string. The information was encoded in the JWT. We sent that information in the JWT and we used it to generate it. So this is how we use JWT or JSON Web Tokens. Next, what do we want to do? Instead of authenticating the JWT in the GET request, define it to be used as a middleware. So we had studied middlewares and Express supports middlewares, and one of the most common use cases for middlewares is authentication. So instead of writing this code in the GET, let's try and construct a middleware to it. So let's go back and let's create, say, a function here. Function authenticate token. Let's say call it this. We know the middleware takes three: request, response, and next. That's how we define it. And what all do we want to do there? Let's put this part of the code here. Let me just take this code here and we will modify it. Let me copy and paste it here. So we will verify it. Else, what do we want to do here? Let's console.log the data and let's put request.user is equal to, say, data.user. And we will not put this part here. And at the end of it, what do we want to do? So here we are sending the response, here we are sending the response. In the next here, we will just call the next. So we have defined the middleware. Now we need to use it. So how do we use it? We will say app.use. We want to use it only for my orders. So my orders, comma, authenticate token. Now that we have done it, we will get the user in from the request. So we don't need to write all this code. We can just say let user is equal to request.user, and this will, or we can just say request.user.id. That is all we need to do. So in this case, the middleware should get fired and the same thing should happen. Let's test it. Let's send this request. We have gotten the response. So we got the, let's put a console.log here in middleware authenticate token, so that we know that. Let's test it again. So now if I send it, I get the response back. If we look at the console, so we are in the middleware authenticate token, we get that user ID and we here just send the orders to the user. So this is how the middleware works. And now this middleware function is available for all such routes that we want to configure. So the get becomes much simpler and the authentication logic has moved to the middleware. There is another way we could have done it, and this is what it asks us to do: authenticate the JWT as a route handler. So instead of defining it as a middleware, there is another approach in Express that we can use, which is route handler. Let's see, what do we mean by that? It means that in this get, we can define a function here. So we could have, say, called authenticate token here. So this function will get executed and then this code will happen. So here what we can do is, instead of configuring it in the middleware as app.use, we will just put it like this. And exactly the same function, the same way it will work. So after that, the next thing it will do is it will call this model. So we can provide a function or we can provide an array of functions here. So here we just need to authenticate token, and let us make a change that we have removed it from the middleware. So we removed it from the middleware. So we don't need the middleware console.log, and let us put a console.log here in get request slash my orders. So once we reach here, we'll get a console.log. Let's also not print the headers. So let's do that. And now let's restart the server. So now when I send it, the token has expired, but let's see what do we get here. So we got the token. Because the token was expired, it did not call the get, it did not reach here, it just sent it back. Let's generate a new token. So we have generated a new token. Now if I test it with this token, we get the order IDs. This is perfect. And if we look at our console, so this is the token we received. We were able to verify the token, extract the user ID, and then we entered the get request. In the get request, we got the user object that we had put in the request and used that to respond. So that is another way we can do it. So this is known as route handler, and the other approach was defining it as a middleware. Next, what do we want to do? Create a node server get info, does not check whether the JWT exists or not, and sends a response, hello, welcome to the tutorial. So the objective of this is that how do we do it without a JWT? This is now like a standard code that we have been writing. So this is /info. We don't need to do anything. Function request comma response and standard code response dot send hello welcome to the tutorial. This is all that we want to do. So here we have not defined a authenticate token. We are not authenticating the JWT in any of the three approaches that we talked, either within the get request or as a middleware or as a route handler. This should work. Let's test it. So let's make a get request, and this is /info, and we just get the response. So this is the standard use case, and this is working fine. So next, what do we want to do? Using JWT with cookies. So in the previous example, what we did, we used JWT with the header and the field authorization in header, and that's the most common use case of JWT or how we use it. But we can also use it with cookies. So in the previous example, instead of using JWT in the header, send a cookie named JWT token in post/login. So once we log in, instead of sending the cookie in the response, we will instead of sending the JWT token in the response, we will set a cookie. The name of the cookie would be JWT token, and its value will be the real token, the JWT. Use the cookie and JWT to authenticate the user in get/my orders using a middleware. So we want this to now work with cookies rather than with header. So let's make change to that previous code. So if you have not seen the earlier video where we used cookies, I would strongly suggest that we go ahead and look at that video first before you come back and see how do we handle this with cookies. So first thing, let's do a require const cookie parser is equal to require cookie parser. Once we have done that, we need to set its app.use cookie parser. We will not use signed cookies, we will use normal cookies, which is why we are not passing it any key here. Why are we using normal cookies? Because the token has already been signed in JWT, so we don't need signed cookies. Next, what do we want to do? Let's just define our cookie name. Let cookie name is equal to, and what was it? JWT token. So in our post, what will we do? Instead of sending the token, for that, let's say response.cookie. What is the name of the cookie? Cookie name. And what is its value? Its value is this token. And in the send, we can just say login success. Let's test this part of it first. So here let's send in a login and we get an error. Argument name is invalid. 51 at line 51. So this should be cookie name. I don't know why we made that mistake. So cookie name comma token. Let's send it again. And we have gotten a login success. Let's test the cookies. So we have a cookie. The name of the cookie is JWT token and it has this value. Perfect. Once we have gotten the cookie, we need to handle it in the get. We want to do it as a middleware. So let me delete it from here. And let us put an app.use. Where will be the app.use? After the cookie parser, after we have done it. So let's put the app.use authenticate token. So what do we do here? How do we get the cookie? So request dot cookies, and what's the name of the cookie? Cookie name. Now once we have gotten the cookie, the rest would work identically. We don't need to do anything. Let's see if that works. Let's test it. We were already logged in. Let's do a get request and we get all our orders. So we get all our orders. Let me do one thing. So now no cookie will be sent. Now if I send it, what do we get? We get please log in first. So this is perfect and this is how it should have worked. So with this slight change between authorization as a header and as a cookie, we have been able to use it. If we test our get info should work either ways. And in info we are getting please log in first. Why are we getting it? Because in our middleware we called it at all times. We did not configure the route. So where is our middleware configured? So let's put it /my orders, and this is where we want this middleware to work. Let's restart it and we get that thing to work. So again, using cookies also we can do it, and using headers is typically the more preferred approach, and that is how we use JSON web tokens with Node.js.